Hello, and welcome to this, the Savage Balance Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode number 29 of the Savage Balance Podcast. How you all doing, guys? Hope you're doing well. Hope you've sort of adjusted effectively and accordingly with this sort of change from, that orange haze, that kind of beautiful summer warmth that we had a week ago or so, and sort of try to embrace and accept the sort of, black, grey, drizzly sort of bleakness, you'd say. I think there's room for bleakness. There's room for grey. I'd say embrace it and enjoy it. Go and stand outside as long as it's safe to. Don't stand out in too strong a winds, but get a little bit of that light rain on your face and just enjoy it. Come on. It's the planet Earth that we live on, and it's got some lovely rain for you, so just bloody well go and suck it up. That's what I say. Talking about sucking it up and that kind of language, thanks for everyone who listened to last week's episode. If you didn't catch it, it was sort of about the phrase man up and the sort of negative connotations that come with it, but also trying to find, the potential positives in it and how we can reframe it for our current sort of climate and landscape. So if you didn't hear that, you can go and check that out now, because podcasts seem to just sit there forever. You can go and check out episode 1 if you want. You can also listen to the trailer, but it was the trailer I recorded was supposed to be just a brief thing I did, and I was going to go back and update it because it was, it was just me saying, I'm going to delete this, but now I can upload files when I want to, whereas before I couldn't. I had to, wait for the first episode to be uploaded. Sort of technical stuff, and I just didn't bother changing it. So that still exists, is what I'm saying. But maybe just go back one episode for now and see, trying to avoid that. Anyway, I don't want to waffle too much because I think this is going to be a very dense and thick episode, and potentially a two-parter as well. I've got that suspicion. You all have known before me because by this point, as in by the point that I'm talking, because I'd have already written part 1 if it's part 1. If it ain't part 1, or if it is part 1 of 1, then I won't bother writing part 1 of 1. But if it is part 1 of 2, then I will write part 1, and then you'll know that there is a part 2 coming. But before I jump into the sort of, I wanted to say the meat of this episode. I guess that's the phrase, isn't it? It's just, it's the conditioning. It's odd when you're a vegan human being and you want to say phrases like jump into the meat of this podcast, and you think, I don't want to jump into the meat. The meat is not the best part of the plate. The meat is the worst part of the plate, I would say. If I had a plate with lovely vegetables on it and a piece of meat, I would be going, someone's grown some wonderful vegetables, and they've also taken the life of a sort of living creature and then cut a piece off of it and then put it next to the vegetables. And it would, if I'm honest, put me off the vegetables. It's not appetizing anymore. Anyway, that was a pre-ramble. Before the pre-ramble, before the faux meat of this podcast, it's basically, I saw a article today in the BBC News website, and I sort of thought it does relate to what I want to talk about today, but I thought it was just worth addressing in a sort of small way now. And the article, I can't remember what it's called, actually. I should have written what it was called, but there'll be a link to it in the show notes so you can find it in there. But I'll read you a few bits from it so you have an idea of what it's about. Since the year 2000, the plastics industry has manufactured as much plastic as all the preceding years combined, a World Wildlife Fund report in 2019 found. The production of virgin plastic has increased 200-fold since 1950 and has grown at a rate of 4% a year since 2000, the report says. This has spurred companies to replace single-use plastic with biodegradable and compostable packaging designed to dramatically reduce the toxic footprint plastic leaves behind. So this, well, and so from that there, it goes on to say that in March it was announced that Skittles are developing a compostable packaging in the US ready for 2022. And then they go into a little bit as well, talking about the difference between biodegradable and compostable, because sometimes they are interchangeable in a sense. And they say everything biodegrades eventually, but not everything will be able to break down in a compostable environment. And you don't need a compost bin or program for these materials. You can just throw them in your garden soil. And then there's sort of a few quotes throughout it that are talking about it via the economics, saying, our vision is to support a circular economy where packaging never becomes waste, and by 2025 we plan to reduce our virgin plastic use by 25% and for 100% of our plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable or compostable. Achieving a circular economy will take industry, governments, NGOs and customers all working together. Now, I think on the face of it, other than the kind of very scary statistics at the beginning, like it sounds like progression moving forwards, and I would say I would agree with that. It feels like positive steps in the right direction. So I don't want to, poo-poo, what was that the phrase? Talking about like the destruction of environments by plastic, and I'm talking about poo-poo. So I don't want to poo-poo the idea originally, like initially, like there's a lot of good in that kind of approach. And, I'm hoping to see more and more of it, especially moving away from the more dangerous and toxic elements of it. But I think what I was reading from it and what I was thinking about it when I was reading it is that my view is, and what I understand of it is, simply replacing materials that exist for sort of better versions of those materials won't be enough. As in, if we are simply saying we've got plastic packaging that doesn't biodegrade or compost, and we swap that for, this exactly the same manufacturing, but now it's in compostable packaging, that this will make the significant difference. My feeling is that it won't be. I guess I'm thinking about people seeing the packaging, seeing, oh, okay, it says that it's compostable, that's good, and just assuming that, it's okay to throw it in the bin because it will compost, or, maybe throwing it in their recycling and not understanding sort of the education around it might be difficult, because I can't imagine many people saving their bags of Skittles and digging up an area in their garden without, being given the proper guiding to do that. And I'm not sure, if there's much talk about, more sort of publicly available compostable areas being available. Like, I can't remember where I've been before in the world, but there was a place where they were. There was a place, and I can't remember where it was. Damn it, I wish I could remember the name of the place. So it's somewhere if you Google the planet Earth, it's somewhere in that vicinity. There's a place that has, on street in various places, compostable areas to put your stuff in, which makes wonderful sense. I just feel like simply changing to compostable or biodegradable packaging is not enough, and we need some kind of systems change or a change in the way that we purchase or consume products. So we need to change really how we see our role in society as well, and like our responsibility. And obviously there is a lot of responsibility on the heads of companies, and the pressure that's on them is wonderful to make these sorts of changes. So it's wonderful that they're willing to adopt and sort of appease people who are passionate enough about this. And there must be, those voices must be loud enough for them to be hearing it, which is wonderful. But I just think trying to keep the current system afloat is only going to lead to further damage, still seeing the planet as a commodity, still seeing it as something that we can use. And just the idea of switching Skittles to compostable packaging, to me, it feels like a good approach in the right direction, but not the sole. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to be the driving force. I feel that we need to really embrace change and to really do the work that we need. It feels like almost a gesture in a sense. It feels like we're doing our bit because we've got compostable packaging. I wonder if the prices will go up as well. I wonder if they'll be expecting consumers to take that hit as well. Consumers of Skittles will have to pay more. I'm not too sure how it looks in that sense, but it feels like there needs to be a change in the way that we consume Skittles rather than a way in which we change how we purchase Skittles and the responsibility of what to do with that stuff afterwards. That was my feeling after reading it anyway, and I just wanted to mention it because it wasn't available. None of that sort of dialogue was available in this BBC News article. And in fact, it's definitely a podcast I will do more in depth one day. Like, I want to talk about the environment and good ways to approach it, and like what we can do personally, and how we can sort of approach it, not just in terms of as a consumer, but as a human being, like as a citizen, and as an activist, for example, and all these different variants of how we could describe ourselves. But I saw that and I just felt it was worth saying, and it sort of ties in quite nicely to the podcast I'm going to talk about today. So I think let's kick this podcast off a little bit by talking about mindfulness. Bit of a jump maybe for some people, but there we go. I've done it. I've leaped, and I've jumped straight headfirst into a big cloud full of mushy silence. At least that's what some people think it is. In fact, it's probably easier to start off with a definition of mindfulness so people understand a bit what I'm talking about, because there's a lot of misconceptions and preconceptions about what mindfulness is. A good definition I found was the process of placing your attention onto something for the purpose of decreasing our stress and increasing our empathy. It's basically that action of putting your attention onto something. And it has its origins, I guess it's sort of taken really from Buddhist philosophies and sort of mindfulness meditation. But, there's examples of it in other religions too, in Abrahamic prophetic teachings, and examples of it Christian monks meditating in places, and vows of silence must certainly incorporate some version of mindfulness into it, because, you're silent and you're very much paying attention to the action that you're taking right then and there. And I want to try and address some of the preconceptions a bit in a way, because I imagine people saying, like, people who have been introduced to it sort of thinking, what is the point of it really? Just, concentrating on your breath, or concentrating on a raisin in your mouth, or all of these sorts of things. What's the actual benefits? I guess one way of talking about it is, I think we are definitely in a society at the moment in which our attention and focus is constantly being taken away, like it's being pulled somewhere else by our phone, by our screens. And I can attest to this, because this episode took me a long time to research and to write, and partly because it was quite convoluted and I wanted to tie in lots of things and make it, flow quite smoothly, and finding out different facts and, doing the research basically for it. But partly, it's just getting distracted all the time. Like the instrument that I'm using to write it is also the instrument that is sort of got all of the world's knowledge on it. So it keeps pulling me away. I'm there, and then I go onto the internet to quickly, find out the definition of a word, or to find out different spellings, or, look at the synonyms of something, and or to look up articles. And I just sometimes naturally find myself like typing in a thing, and I go, what are you doing? And suddenly I'm on a social media platform checking if, I've had any new followers, or, I'm on Instagram and I'm looking at somebody's story, or I'm looking at football news, and it's like, what? And sometimes I'm watching myself and I think that happens so instinctively and quickly, I didn't even have a chance to say anything about it. So like that is one thing, and we carry those devices in our pockets all the time. So and I guess television and stuff as well, the amount of things that we can consume, and podcasting. There's a lot of technology out there that is really just taking our attention away, and that's just one thing that can take our attention away, and how we're trained when we are young people to not really, there's no mindfulness training when we're young or anything like that, so we're not really equipped to deal with that, and it's becoming exponentially more difficult the more that sort of internet companies are understanding how to harness that more and more. So yeah, our attention and focus is sort of constantly being taken. And I guess mindfulness is a way of sort of readdressing and regaining that focus and anchoring it into something. And yeah, like a lot of the time, it is the breath, like mindfulness, meditation, focusing on the breath, either at the ends of the nose or in the stomach. But, there's a guy who I heard on the Happy Pair podcast, which if you haven't heard, it's great because the Happy Pair are wonderful and they have some really insightful, interesting conversations. And they have a conversation with somebody called Niall Breslin, I think he's known as Brezzy. I think he's more known in Ireland. I hadn't heard of him before. Anyway, he talks about doing therapy and music therapy. And he says about how you can sort of have mindfulness through music therapy by listening to the music, like really, putting headphones in and being very present with it. Hearing, for every slide of the string on the guitars or every like breath in the vocals or every pause, every note that's played or the contrasting notes that are within there, like you really anchor your attention into your favorite song. And that is a form of mindfulness. And I think it's true, mindfulness can be in anything. It can be in sport. It can be in, doing the washing up, or it can be in eating. Mindful eating is a, big thing. And really mindfulness is about just being present in what you're doing. In fact, Brezzy's definition in that podcast was anchoring your attention in something. That's all mindfulness is. It's anchoring your attention in something. So just being there with it. In fact, before I go on, I will say that I'm going to put a link to that podcast because there's some really great stuff in there about mindfulness, but also about mental health, and it's just a really good chat. So I'd recommend checking that out, the Happy Pair podcast with Brezzy. Link in the show notes for you to listen to. But, so that process of anchoring your attention to something is a way of, quietening the mind. And it's not about, another preconception is not about getting your mind to be silent. There's lots of people who say, I can't meditate because I can't stop the thoughts from happening. And no, you can't stop the thoughts because nobody can stop the thoughts. That's not the point, and that's not the approach of mindfulness or meditation. Like the point is to, again, anchor your attention into something so that, I got distracted then. I started I'm literally talking about anchoring your attention in something and keeping that focus. And I picked up a little sort of converter thing so I can put my SD card into the laptop and just started fiddling with it and peeling stuff off of it. And then I was like, oh, do I need that thing that I was peeling off of it? And then I remembered I'm talking right now. The words that are coming out of my mouth are not getting distracted. I'm going to put it behind the laptop because it's just not a good example, is it? I'm an infallible human. I can make mistakes. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So yeah, where was I? Not getting distracted. That's where I was. Yeah, so it's not about getting the mind to go silent. It's simply anchoring the thoughts, anchoring the attention into something else that isn't those thoughts. So every time you get distracted by the thoughts, which is sort of inevitable, you simply bring your attention back into the thing you're anchoring it into. So it's the breath. You just simply reattach your focus onto the breath. If it's the music, just reattach your focus and anchor yourself into that music. It's not about stopping the thoughts. It's not about quietening. It's almost like, imagine they're on your left shoulder and they're talking away and you turn to face them because they're talking at you. It's almost like the mindfulness is turning your head back to the right so that you're not focusing on them. You're focusing on whatever is on your right shoulder. I don't know. The breath or the music is there. And every time it talks and you look back to the left, you go back to the right. It's sort of that process, really. Actually, I'll tell you what. I think now is a good point as we're talking a bit more about mindfulness. That podcast, one of the reasons I like that Brezzy podcast so much is he gave he called them these 6 fundamental principles for mindfulness. I just want to go through them very briefly. I think you should listen to his words and his whole podcast anyway, because he's said some really interesting stuff and really like down to earth and, just really understandable and accessible. But I like his 6 principles to mindfulness. So if you can sort of take these on board and just apply them to everyday life, your life will become calmer and it'll become quieter and it will become easier in that sense, just in the sense of not resisting against something. I'm not saying easier as in the external stuff that happens to you, but internally your reaction to it will become easier and calmer the more you can apply these principles. So number 1 is non-judgment, and really non-judgment of yourself. Don't be judgmental about how you're approaching it or your practice, or if you should or shouldn't have been doing it anymore. Just non-judgment is very key. Number 2 is non-striving. Like, we're very much attuned in this society to try and achieve something, to always be striving to get something. And this isn't about being the best. This is about just simply being in the moment. And it's not about being good at mindfulness. It's just about applying the principles however you're feeling. 3, which I really like, he calls it the fuck it bucket, which is basically, if you're in the space of meditation or mindfulness and a thought comes up and you get distracted, he says, chuck it in the fuck it bucket. If you just chuck it in the fuck it bucket and move on to it, like it's still there, you can just pick up the bucket afterwards, but you just put it in the bucket from now on. So I like that. So it's not stopping thoughts, it's just stopping following them. It's really good. Number 4 is be curious about your experience. If you're feeling anxious, where are you feeling anxious? If you're feeling happy, where are you feeling happy? Feel it in your body and feel it in your mind and see if there's repetitive thoughts coming up. But just be curious about your experience, be open to it. Number 5, be compassionate to yourself. Like, again, this isn't about being the best. This isn't about achieving anything. This is simply about taking the time for yourself. So, just take the moments to be compassionate and kind to yourself. And number 6 is acceptance. Accept how you're feeling. He says, sit with the good, bad, and the ugly. Just be present with it. And I really like those 6 principles. They're like quite easy to understand and they're quite applicable for any moments in your life anyway. So again, check that podcast out. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so I think, that's a sort of idea of what mindfulness is. But I think people go, okay, that's what it is and that's what I do to get it. But what's the point of it? Like, what am I going to get out of it? And there's loads of really wonderful benefits to a mindfulness practice. For one, it reduces stress, which is not only wonderful for your mental health, but also your physical health, because stress sort of like helps bring up inflammation, and inflammation is the beginning of all bad body problems. I was going to say diseases, but I was thinking maybe it's more than that. I don't know. Anyway, it's good for your physical health and it's good for your mental health because it reduces stress. You get to experience higher levels of happiness, like however much happiness you experience now, like the more you open up to it, the more you're opening yourself up to happiness. And actually, the more you're opening yourself up to the full experience, but a truer experience. So maybe you might feel sadness, more clearly, but you might feel, the sadness more healthily as well, and you get to process it better. And therefore, like the sadness that was like maybe, quite sticky and gloopy and like it will hang around with you for a long time and you just can't shake it off. Like this might feel a bit lighter and crisper kind of sadness, and you'll have a better understanding of what it is. So just a higher understanding of your emotions in general. You get to experience higher levels of empathy as well. It trains you in empathy. Like you get that moment in a conversation where you can suspend your judgment briefly and you can access more curiosity around other people and yourself and be more open to those things. And you also, you get to understand yourself better in that process of opening yourself up to that empathy. And you also, you can become a much more content person as well, like have more resilience to the external world and have, better relationships with people and yourself, better focus, better relationships to work, to worries and to anxiety. There's loads more things it can do. It's just, it's a really useful tool, especially in our modern life, really. But that's a sort of vague talk about what mindfulness is in a nutshell. But now we've talked about what it sort of is, I sort of want to talk about how mindfulness fits into our current systems. Where does it find its place in that? Because I guess, a lot of people live hard and stressful lives, and that is a good tool for it. But I just wonder how well it can assimilate with the system that we have at the moment. So I guess a good place to start with that is sort of talk about what our current system is, so we know what we're actually dealing with. And I guess my definition, and I think a broadly understood definition of what our current system is, in fact, when I'm referring and defining our current system, I'm going to be referring to, such ideas as sort of neoliberalism, sort of as our socio-political background, and consumer capitalism and globalism. These sorts of ideas help sort of make our sort of economic, social, and political background, or just the society that we live in. I think it's sort of like this is the kind of default westernized economic system, we've had for the past few decades, actually sort of since Reagan and Thatcher, really. But I believe that, it's not like a lot of those are sort of economic systems, but I think they're also, influencing and, really heavy aspects of our political and social systems as well. I think actually a good place to start is let's give some definitions so we know what we're talking about. So neoliberalism, in a very small nutshell, is a political theory that wants to see personal liberty maximized by limiting government interference in the operation of free markets. So again, I guess a classic example of this is that sort of Reagan-Thatcher era and Margaret Thatcher, allowing people to buy their own social housing. That is a good example of a sort of neoliberal idea and concept. And so that is very hard, in operation of free markets has capitalism at its heart. And capitalism is an economic system in which the means of production and distribution are privately and corporately owned, and development occurs through the accumulation and reinvestment of profits gained in a free market. So, a lot of it is based around this free market. And globalisation is really sort of the idea of increased trade around the world, sort of like borderless trade amongst people. And I guess you'd put a lot of, internet-based companies out there now, like Google and Apple, Facebook, those sorts of big, heavy names in that sort of world are sort of really, they are globalized. They're not defined to any specific area. So those are sort of the definitions of the ideas I'm talking about. And I do think it's fair to say that this is a set of economic values that is, heavily represented by our current system, because one, it like it heavily influences, and I think it could be argued that it is almost the primary function. I understand that's maybe more of an opinion. It's my opinion, but it's more the primary function of our current political class. Like our government are very much sort of viewing everything as through an economic lens. I mean, I guess COVID has certainly, that during COVID times, that's become a really high point on that as well. But I think a good example of that is how we, are using the planet as a resource specifically for economic gain, like the Wentworth Link and HS2, a third runway at Heathrow, burrowing under Stonehenge and all these huge infrastructure developments, the constant housing that's being created. How does that set, and how is that sort of in line, in conjunction with a government that has also declared a climate emergency through the pressure of Extinction Rebellion? I think for me, it's all about economic expansion, and this is all at the expense of the planet for, I think, short-term economic gain, and the idea of sort of enhancing and growing the economy, but based on old models and not embracing the sort of new models as well. So I think using the planet as a resource for economic gain, even though, the planet is a finite resource, and treating it in a way, that capitalism is sort of looking for exponential expansion, they don't fit together. So that's one way in which I think, the political class, prioritizes the economic thing over other things. Another example as well is like in the US, but also the UK, like lobbying groups and just the pressures of big financial companies like powerful pharmaceuticals and meat and dairy and fast food giants. They have a huge sway in policies and sort of in research that's conducted and, the things that influence them and, bringing in people who are, claim to be impartial, and yet you find out they have sort of links to people in government afterwards. They're very much in hand with each other. And again, they will be prioritizing their own economic gains. So, that's another reason there. Another reason I think as well is, seeing how companies are actually more powerful than countries. As I mentioned before, like Facebook and Google, they have more power and more sway than, and more money than some countries do who have, obligations to their. In fact, even, Jeff Bezos, I think, was he worth 122 billion? I think he's one of 3 or 4 centibillionaires. Like that is more than, the economical structures of countries, as I say. So it's like that amount of wealth in one person's hands is shocking, but it shows you how much influence they can have over sort of our political climate because of, they can make decisions politically, but aren't necessarily beholden to anyone. I think another way in which, that our society is sort of driven by this whole economic globalisation, capitalism, neoliberalism idea is, you see a lot of the time ethics become a secondary concern to profits. One example being what I mentioned a second ago, using the planet as an economic resource, that's going to have huge ethical implications as well as, like physical survival, like the millions of potential climate refugees that will be brought about because of climate change. Investing in old industries that maybe need to be reshaped, and where's that going to leave those groups, those villages, those societies, those people who are relying on those industries? Maybe we should be trying to reinvest for their sakes in newer technologies that will bring them into the future and not leave them behind and leave them stuck, I guess, as we sort of saw with, with coal mines being shut down and stuff like that in the 80s and stuff. So there's difficulties around ethical implications and not prioritizing them over the economic. I don't even think it's not prioritizing them. I think they always, from what I see, always come secondary. It's very few times in which I've heard, it would have been wonderful to hear, because of the ethical implications and the potential, environmental implications, we're not going to tunnel under Stonehenge. We're not going to, knock down the forest in which Roald Dahl wrote most of his books in for the sake of, a faster train line. And really maybe reinvesting in our current train lines would be better rather than just building new ones. Anyway, the third thing I'm thinking about is less to do with the political landscape and more the societal landscape, like our societal and also our personal goals and our personal feelings within that society, because we've been brought up in this environment, like it's enriched within the society, sort of neoliberal capitalism and sort of globalizational ideas. They are sort of the background to how we're living, they sort of influence the people that we're brought up by, decisions, they influence how our schools are run, they influence conversations, like it's in the air, like it taints the air, and so we pick up on a lot of it there. So I think, like, as I say, we're trained to view this world sort of like societally, but then it comes into us personally, like, the prioritizing of career, which starts, starting younger and younger, isn't it? Like it's almost starting like exams starting, at 5 or 6 or maybe 8, or like choosing what secondary school you go to can influence what kind of GCSEs you might get, and those GCSEs will affect your A-levels, and your A-levels will affect where you go to university before you get the job. Like, and even, 14, 15-year-olds or 13, 14-year-olds, they say, what do you want to do as GCSE? And bear in mind your career. It's like, these are children, these are kids. Like, it's great if they do have a strong idea of what they want to do, and they should be happy to pursue that. But if you don't know, Where'd you go with that? All that pressure that can be put on people from such a young age to fulfill a career. It's just in the air like that. And I think even the ideas of like schools are sort of their criticisms of schools have included things like training people to not necessarily, it's not a pursuit of learning, but it's a pursuit of obedience. Like it's more the fact of, can you teach somebody to sit in a room and be quite bored for 6 hours in a day, to sit and to listen and to simply copy things down? Because a lot of the jobs that are available will be sitting down, listening to somebody, copying things down, in a boring existence. So I think, these are examples of things that are in the environment and they come and affect us personally. And I think there's also something that can be said as well, like the concept of society in terms of individualism versus collectivism. And I guess, an example of a different society that we live in that's not focused on this economic push and this economic rush would be, a collectivistic society in which money would be spent maybe protecting the most vulnerable amongst us, from discrimination, welfare for disabled, also for socially, economically challenged people who can't afford enough, and, catching people with mental health, all of these sorts of ideas, like a collectivistic society, like the money that I earn, I'm sort of looking out for somebody else with. But I think we live in more of a individualistic society, which you can understand from, back from the 80s again, Margaret Thatcher. If you can buy your own social housing is sort of a web to catch people so they don't fall down. But if you can buy your own social housing, that's my house now. I own this property. It's for me. And, now it's almost like, I understand this isn't a criticism of anybody during that time. It's something I don't know enough about, clearly. So I don't mean this to sound attacking. It's just a thought pattern of where my brain's going at the moment. But, if I take this house, then that's somebody else who can't have this house. And I think we do tend to have that sort of attitude of treating society, and, the society has brought us up to treat ourselves as individual consumers, peddle the ideas of competition and comparison and keeping up with the Joneses, and people are on their own. Like, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, so you should be able to too, regardless of what situation they're in. So I think there is a kind of, as I say, like neoliberal, sort of individualistic, capitalist, globalisation, like economy, top priority. These are the sort of feelings of what our system is at the moment. It's sort of hard to define, isn't it? I did take a long time trying to do this because I couldn't get to that place where I could define specifically what it was, what our society is. Like, it's hard. Like, I don't know if you've tried to do that before, but it's a challenge. Like, it's rough. It's difficult to really be able to pinpoint it and to really be able to properly cement it in. But it can be tough. But I think that's a good representation of what it is. Now, the reason why I've sort of talked about these two things kind of separately, but kind of together, like, I'm interested in how our current system, which I spent defining there, and mindfulness sit together, sort of coexist in this world, because it's becoming it has been a big deal for a long time in our world, in our society. And I think its first appearance, at a first glance, they seem to be sort of in opposition. One is very much about reducing stress, higher levels of empathy, understanding yourself better, becoming a more content person, all of these sorts of things. I don't know how well they sit with the values of our societies at the moment, the ideas of, capitalism. You are a consumer, you are an individual. So that sounds like a decrease in empathy, because it's like looking after yourself first rather than, taking on other people's boards. And this sort of pursuit of money can be stressful, and that doesn't sit well with that stress. So on one sense, you could see it as sort of like, almost like the antidote to it. Like, oh, if we're going down this road, maybe we should have an antidote in place. I just find it interesting that, like, many major companies, like Goldman Sachs, Google, and Nike, they're sort of like spearheading and bringing in and spending a lot of money, really, on mindfulness practices and workshops and courses for their employees. And you sort of think, well, at least in my head, I look at that and I think those two things are not sitting well together. They're sort of in opposition, and one might be a cure for the other one, but like it's not a sustainable cure. So I guess that's one I want to try and look into a bit more, and I guess ask, how does mindfulness function in our current system with that in mind? And I think it's true. Mindfulness it's more than just a meditation practice or a philosophical outlook in our current world. Mindfulness is an industry, like it is a capitalistic sort of, it's an industry. It's got, like, there's money behind it. In fact, it's estimated in the USA that by 2022 it will be over $2 billion. That's the sort of level of industry. It's not just, I guess, mindfulness. It's sort of a branch of the wellness industry in itself. And I know a lot of people are suspicious of it because of its kind of sort of corporate ties, and it's sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, I think people have a general kind of suspicion of it anyway. So anyway, that is a sort of, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that a sort of massive introductory episode to exploring that idea more in the next episode, in which I'm going to sort of talk a bit about, what am I going to talk about? So I guess I want to talk a bit about, how mindfulness is sort of stripped and corporatized and is there sort of to train us to become better workers, and how it's sort of removed from its spiritual or religious roots and turned into this other commodity which has its positives and its negatives as well. So I really want to explore a lot more of those sorts of ideas in the next episode. But I think this is a good place to draw the line, and like it's a good place to stop really until next week. So thanks very much for listening to this, guys. I hope you tune in next week. I'm excited to sort of get the ball rolling on that. If you could share this podcast with your friends, that would be great. And, we have a social media at Savage Balance Podcast. That's the Instagram, and Twitter is SavBalPod. I'm a lot more active on there. So I think I always just said it's sort of there if you want it. But I'm using it more. So you might want to come and check out what I'm doing on there. We have an email address, savbalpod@gmail.com. Like, if you don't like my how I've defined society or how general system, or if you feel like there's more to say about mindfulness, or if you think, I know where he's going with this, I don't think it's going to be good, or if you're like, there's some good stuff I could bring to the table here, let me know, savbalpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Got a website, savbalpod.com, and that's slowly becoming more and more updated. I'll really properly announce it when it's good to go. If you could subscribe and comment and rate and review on Apple Podcasts, that would mean a lot to me. The artwork is by Dolly Gray. The music is by Danny Tonks. Thanks very much for listening to this, guys. I'm really looking forward to sort of concluding this two-parter next week, and I'd love to see you there. But until then, just enjoy the bleakness. I guess there's a lot of bleakness that I've talked about in this podcast, but enjoy it. Enjoy the bleakness of the external world. See if you can, what was it George Carlin said? He said, when you're born in, when you're born, you get tickets to see the freak show, and in America, you just get a front row seat. That's a viewpoint, isn't it? That's sort of, he's a great comedian. I love George Carlin. Sort of one of them, sort of initial sparks for me about comedy. I thought you just said this podcast was over. You're going, I think we should leave it there. And then you're like, well, I may as well start another one up in the middle of it about my love for George Carlin. I haven't actually seen him for a long time. Would be good to look at that again, because he used to say words that at the time I'd laugh but made me a bit uncomfortable. It'd be good to sort of reassess how he is. I know that there's a lot of stuff that's just going to prove his genius, but I wonder if there's some tricky stuff in there as well. And if you listen to this a lot, I think you know that I like to get in that tricky stuff. I like to sit in it and We'll get all cozy in the sludgy, tricky, messy, gooey. Ugh, it's all over me. Oh God, where do I go? I can't breathe. No, I can breathe. It's all right. Because it's fine. It's just thoughts and it's just opinions and it's just words. And as long as you are open to other people's words and opinions, it's all cool. Hey, thanks very much for listening to this. I do look forward to seeing you next week. We'll jump into this into more detail, but have a good week. Enjoy that bleakness. Find space to appreciate it. Enjoy the rain. Let it fall on your face and just breathe with it. It's all cool. Nice one, guys. Chat to you next week.